Hello, I'm Philip Muggleston, and in this series of videos we're covering the predictive capabilities native to SAP HANA. In this video we're going to look at scaling. This is another important aspect of data preparation. Now scaling allows us to normalize numeric values, effectively make it so that all the values fall between a specified range. For example, all values between 0 and 1, or all of the values between -1 and +1. So let's look at some input data, and we have, as we've seen in other videos, customers' income. And we can see we have the income ranging in thousands of dollars across quite a number of different values. So what we want is to normalize that before our analysis. So we want to maybe get all the values of income to be basically put within a range of 0 to 1. So we can do that using the scaling capability of the predictive analysis library. So in order to perform scaling, we need to run the scaling range capability. And for that, we, as always, will create a procedure using sysafl, and then we'll point our data at that and run it, and we'll see different parameters to show the different ways that we can do the scaling. So the first thing we're going to do is to define our input data, which in this case we have an ID, customer ID is integer, and the income is an integer. Then we're going to define our parameter table and our results table. The results effectively have the same input as the input table. However, because we're normalizing, for example, between 0 and 1, we may want to convert in some cases from integer to double because we have decimals. We create our signature table, we use the wrapper generator, we'll create a procedure called pal_sr, and we'll use the scaling range option. And that is the one that will actually allow us to do scaling to a specific range. So let's run that code, which is what we run once. We've now set that up. What we can then do is in our application schema, we can basically create the parameter and results tables, and we can set the values for the parameters. So in terms of the scaling, the PAL allows three different types, three methods of scaling. So the values are 0, 1, and 2. So the first method with 0 is called min-max normalization. And this is pretty linear. It basically says, okay, the minimum value is, in our case, 0. The maximum is 1. And you can see here I've used the min and max, the new min and new max parameters to specify that. And all of the values from our input data will therefore be normalized within a scale of 0 and 1. And it will do this in a linear way. However, there are other approaches. A couple of others. One of them with a scaling method value of 1 is called z-score or z-score in America, and this stands for zero mean. And what it does, instead of scaling on a linear basis, it takes the absolute mean, so effectively the average of all the values, and then for each value looks at the standard deviation from that, and that's how it sets the value. So the value there will typically be lesser or greater to 0. So the new min and max are not actually relevant when we're using the z-score scaling. And the third approach we've got is called decimal normalization. And effectively what happens here is that the decimal place is moved to get the values within the range that you want to see. So let's have a first example. Let's just create our parameter and results tables and set some first parameters. And now we're ready to go. We can run our analysis. So we're going to run it on our customer income table with the settings. We're going to use the min-max values, so a normal linear scaling first time. So we run that, and if we now refresh our tables, we should have an SR for, that's just my choice of name there, SR_results. If we preview that, we'll now see the values of income. They're all in fact between 0 and 1. In fact, if we sort, we see we have one value at 0, and if we sort descending, we'll have a value at 1, and all of the other values are between 0 and 1. So it's looked at the entire data set, and then for each value assigned where it fits on that scale of 0 to 1. And in fact, another way we could look at that is to actually draw a little chart. So for example, we could take the income value and then plot that for each of the customers. So there we can see the values going from 0 to 1. So we have a 0 value, a 1 value, and then all the other values between. So he's taken the entire range. And we compare that, for example, to the original data where, as we see, we had values that were in many, many thousands. Now all the values are equally relatively distant or close to each other. However, they're all normalized within 0 to 1 range. Now, the second approach that we could take here is not to use the scaling method of linear, but to say let's use the z-score. Let's use 0 mean. We'll take the arithmetic mean and we'll see each value based on that standard deviation. So we set the value here to 1. We can update. And then we clear out our results table as always and run the procedure again. And now, if we're to refresh, we will see that the values have changed. The overall look is very similar. However, the actual values are now between 0 and values more than 0 and less than 0, because this 0 represents the arithmetic mean. It's the z-score is effectively the 0 score. So 0 is the mean, and then each value for each customer represents the standard deviation from that mean. So that's another way that we can do it. And the third way is to use the decimal approach. So for that we would set the scaling method to 2. And if we now run the same example using the decimal approach, again it runs very quickly with HANA, and we refresh. What we'll now see is that the data is this time scaled on a slightly different basis. It's done starting at 0. It's going a little bit above where we might expect, but it's basically moved the decimal places, the relevant number of places, to make the values all fit between 0 and 1. However, that's an example of something that you may only want to use in certain specific scenarios. In most cases, what's very often relevant is to use the scaling method where you give a minimum and a maximum value, and that can be any value you want it to be. So now we've seen a quick overview looking at scaling with the PAL with HANA.